we'll sleep better, we'll have healthier behaviors, and we'll even have improved physical strength. So I think that's kind of a new thing. Like there've been more studies that have been about a mental health, which are, kind of like a little more sense where, oh yeah, we feel purpose, we feel meaningful, we're going to feel better about ourselves, we're going to be happier. But now they've done studies that show that when we have a sense of purpose, our muscles will actually be stronger and work better as well. And I wanted to share a book, of course, which many of you might know. Does anybody know this book, Man's Search for Meaning, by Viktor Frankl? Has anybody heard of it? Kathy has. So.
One of our favorite books.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
We probably read it 2,000 times.
Really?
Wow. Big fan. My father was a big fan.
Viktor Frankl?
Mm-hmm. So it's a small book, but it's quite dense. Viktor Frankl actually is a survivor of concentration camp from World War II. He was a survivor. I think he was in Auschwitz, but he was also in other concentration camps. And he writes about the experience in this book, so it's quite explicit. But what he concluded, and what the real reason that this book is so popular and had so many printing and has influenced so much of the world, is that in the midst of his difficult circumstance, he realized that he had something that a lot of the other people didn't have. And what he had was that he had written a book and it was lost. It was completely destroyed. And he spent he's used his time in the concentration camp to rewrite this book in his head. So like word by word and line by line. And this gave him a sense of purpose. It gave him a sense of meaning. And he was thinking about what he was going to do when he got out of the camp and how his book was going to be helpful for other people. And so he started to create this philosophy, which he called logotherapy, which is meaning, focused on logos, which is having meaning in our lives. And that if we have meaning in our lives, like that's really what we want in our life. Like we think we want to be comfortable, or we think we want to be happy, or we think we want to, have an easy time. But he said, in fact, what we really truly want is we want to feel that we have purpose in our lives. And that if we have purpose, we can survive anything. And there's a quote that he quoted of Nietzsche, which is, "He who has a why to live, can bear almost any how." So we're going to just take that with us as we work today. And we are going to have a presentation from George here, where he's going to talk about one way to think about purpose, which is very special because the thing that I love about George, or I have my system and I have my 8 keys, he has something similar, that he relates everything through relationships. So all of the work that is done in his framework is about how we build our relationships with one another. So even when we're working on purpose today, he's going to be bringing in a perspective of how is our purpose and how we define our purpose set in perspective to the relationships and in our lives, the most important thing. So what I would like to do before I turn it over to George is I would like to ask you all to pull out the colorful worksheet that says Find Your Purpose worksheet. Does everybody have that one?
Not purple, did you say purple?
Colorful.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, colorful. And I'd like to just take a few minutes and like have everybody look over these questions and maybe jot something down on a question that triggers something for you. So we'll just take like maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And maybe, so let's see, there's 5 of you, maybe there's 6 of you. So maybe if you can just, after you jot it down, we're just going to pair up and you can just kind of share what you wrote down with each other.
All of them. Okay. Can I use this pen? Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, the pen's out.
It's all right.
So if everybody has something that they've thought of, if you want to just maybe turn to your partner and share something that came to mind.
Are we supposed to have done number 13 too?
No, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have done them all.
Okay.
And you can take this home and, you know, do it obviously in your own time as well, but.
Sure.
When I was 8 years old, I loved to play outside, loved to look at cloud formation, and to go to my grandmother's house and go through the past. I was really fascinated about the past all the time.
Our parents brought me to the country, we had a country place. And let them go.
Oh, yeah, I did that too. We used to raise the leaves, and I would form them into like walls. When I'm working in the yard or exercising,
I'm not really either. I do looking at photographs and working.
I mean, yes, maybe not hardcore exercises. I wish that to be able to do it. It's just a nice walk.
But I usually don't invest in anybody.
Yeah. I try.
What would you do if you fail? I could be on stage. On stage, but if you couldn't fail. Small stage. Bigger stage. What about you feeling great about yourself?
I think you could look at it in different ways. Because if I knew I couldn't fail, I would be a science. I've always loved science. And I just cut it. Yeah.
Did everybody have a chance to share?
We did.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Small town. I've lived in Italy for a few months.
we're going to revisit this again later. But I thought it was good to kind of just start to think about some of these questions. You know, it's funny, like I remember when I was just doing it just now, when I was 8 years old, I loved. And the two things that I could think of, the first one was writing, which I've always loved. And then the second one was hamsters. That was the only thing I could think of that I loved when I was 8, was hamsters.
What was it?
Hamsters.
Mine was guinea pigs.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, that's awesome. So I think that, you know, we can also think about just particular moments in our life where we have felt connected to our purpose, and moments in our life where we might have felt not connected to our purpose, and how were those feelings different? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to George and let him take the floor. And there is a one-page sheet that Kathy has that is from George that she can hand out.
All right. Thanks, Beth. So you guys are getting to know one of my heroes, getting to know Beth.
And George, I didn't really give much of your biography, so maybe you can, I'm sorry, but maybe you can introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about your background.
Oh, okay. Well, I raised my hand when it was the next career testimony was when I raised my hand. I have spent my first career as a minister and then also a mediator. I became a trained mediator and helped with family financial mediations, parenting agreements, separations, and that kind of thing. And then along the journey, I just kept changing my mind, and y'all may have some understanding that it kind of makes congregations uncomfortable when their minister changes his mind and begins to think differently. And so, and then I woke up. It's been 18 years ago now, but for 13 years, my wife and I were the caregivers for our parents, my parents, her parents. And my wife also had cancer in the midst of those 13 years. And what I realized was that I was having a hard time dealing with normal, because it's normal for people to get old. And it felt really hard for people to get old, even though that was a normal part of life. And I realized that we had things to learn about how to grow old and how to be a family in the world that actually exists instead of the world that used to exist. And so I began a journey of just trying to figure out how to help our family through those things. And then discovered through the research and everything that we really needed to put a system together. And Beth and I have met along the way of trying to build ways to help one another to do that. And I'm really honored to be here with her and with you guys. And you guys know you are part of the select few, right? Most people choose to go through life without really reflecting and thinking and working through the difficult things, and tend to more let life happen to them instead of trying to own how to be in life. And so I congratulate you on that. And if you think it's hard, that's because it's hard to do it. So welcome, and I'm glad to be here. I call my work Life Compass Living, and so everything's based on what I've developed as the Life Compass. It's based on a lot of research, and what I wanted to do was just make it accessible, what we're learning about how to be human and how to share life together. And so Life Compass Living is living in light of and in harmony with what I call a life compass. And so purpose for me, for the folks that I work with, is found in living in harmony with your life compass. So I'm going to talk about what it is to have a life compass, what that means. And really, there are a bunch of people who have talked about the same elements, and a lot of people who experience the life compass do a lot of just agreeing that, yes, that's true. So what I'm hoping the gift is not that it's a whole lot of new, but it's a way to focus it so that you can talk to one another and share life better. Because as Beth was saying, I believe everything's relationships. And what I found is that a lot of people are financing their fears. They would find out a fear they either had now or a fear that out in the future that they had a fear about in the future, and then they would try to have enough finances to solve the fear, to resolve the fear. And I'm suggesting that we go from financing our fears to resourcing our relationships. If we could use all the resources, not just money, but all the other resources of the way we relate and the proximity we have to one another and how we're together, and sharing life more, that we could actually resource the capacity to have the relationships we want in our life. And that would make our life much more rich, much more what I call flourishing, to be able to flourish. So y'all have the outline there in front of you? Yeah, you got it. Great. So what I want to do is talk through it, and then I love questions. I would much rather answer a question you're actually wondering about than to the ones I imagine you have. And so please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions along the way. But what I discovered was that there were 4 elements to human flourishing. In other words, if somebody's going to be a human and like being the person they are, they have to have some kind of mindfulness. People who are religious might call it prayer. There might be people who have meditation and mindfulness practices. But you have to have some time where you actually decide for yourself who you're going to be and how you want to be in your life. And people who don't spend the time to be mindful end up having a life they feel was given to them or forced on them, or they become a victim of circumstance. And so one thing that helps humans flourish is to have mindfulness. Each person has a unique way to do that, but often people gather together and learn together how to be mindful. In fact, that's part of what you're doing with Beth, is you're deciding how to be conscious of what it means to age and how to do that well. And that's part of being mindful as you live your life. So that's one element. Do y'all agree with that? That's really important for all of us?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, that's right. The second is what I call core relationships. And while I can propose that how we're related to everybody, including the earth, matters, what we found out in research is that people are actually healthier and like their life better when they have the relationship they want with the people closest to them, people I call the core relationships. So if you view your life as concentric circles, starting with yourself and then your closest people, working out in concentric circles, humans flourish when they know who they are and where they stand with their closest relationships. And there was a long time in human history where you just grew up knowing who you were, and your core relationships stayed where you lived where they lived, and you had a cycle of life that you went through with your people. And now, if you've noticed, families don't all live in the same place. They don't even end up with the same religious convictions. They don't end up with the same work, even though families used to all have the same work as a family business. Now people are doing crazy things. My son just went to Scotland to do a postdoc on quantum physics and consciousness, and he's living in Scotland. That's not what I do. But anyway, he's in Scotland. And so core relationships matter. And now you have to actually work harder to stay connected in the way you want with your core relationships. Where you used to just yell out the back door and get somebody to come over, now you have to really work to stay together. And that's very important. And physical vitality, Beth has been talking about that, about being healthy. You have to stay vital physically and vital mentally. And when you do those things, you flourish as a human. And then the life compass is, if you're doing that, how do you direct the life you now live? How in your mindfulness practice, in your core relationships, as you're living in your physical vitality and mental vitality, how would you actually choose where to go, what to do, how to order your life? And I'm proposing it's the life compass, which has 3 parts: person, people, place. So what are they? Just so they ring in your head: person, people, and place. Yeah. And the person is really about authoring your life story. This is who I am. This is the story I'm living and how I want to live and my life moving forward. But it's really discovering and living out your best self, who you want to be. And then people are those core relationships. Your life compass is guided by how you are able to be in the lives of the people who are most important to you, and how they are able to be in your life with you. And then place is a place where we can be at home, and that's where our story and our significance are valued and expressed. So a lot of people end up wanting to stay in a place, and it's a particular address, a particular house. And Amy Dupree that works with me, she's a life transition specialist. She has a saying that often people's houses become their prisons when they don't recognize that these other elements are important. In other words, they have to also have their people around them. And so the place is very important. So now let's just look at each one of them individually. and then we'll share a little bit with
We
each
just had
other.
somebody join, who's kind of off the screen there, but it's Trudy is sitting in the red shirt. You can see a little bit of her sleeve. So she just.
Oh, hey, Trudy.
Hi, Dimitri. He's saying hello to you. Oh, hello.
So Trudy, just to, as you can see, we're doing a little different format today. Hi. Now we can see you. Yeah, so we have, we're trying to not use the PowerPoints and leave our faces up on the screen so that it feels more personal and conversational. And then I have George joining us. And we're kind of like going to work through some exercises as we go along today as well, so that we can have more discussion. So I hope you're doing well. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, good, thank you. You.
That's good. I like your red shirt.
That is, it's lovely.
Awesome.
That's great.
There, I want them to hear it as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so the first element of the life compass is person, the second is people, and the third is place. And the reason I chose the idea of a compass is that if you want to go somewhere, one way to get there is to reorient yourself to a compass. If you want to go west, look at the compass, you know how to get west. And so if we can come to understand who we are, our best selves, and how to live that out as a person, and who our people are and how to be in relationship to them and the place we want to live, then we can look at that each day of our lives, and as we go through life, we can be guided. And the first is person, who and how I wish to be in the world. And that's directly related to purpose. One of the things that I discovered was that I often spent my time chasing what I thought was my best case scenario and when I lived my life. And somebody asked me, what was your worst case scenario? And I didn't really want to my worst case scenario, but it took me a whole lot to think about it. Because when I started thinking about my worst case scenario, it ended up being that I would be rejected by people and that I would fail. And then the guy that helped me through that said, is that what you want your worst case scenario to be, that people would reject you and that you would fail? And initially I was like, well, yeah, that's what I think. And he said, so you've turned your worst case scenario to everybody else, because people accepting you is up to them. So they get to decide if your worst case scenario happens. And on top of that, if you have to succeed in a particular way, other people will decide that for you. So you're getting up every morning with everybody else in charge of your worst case scenario. And he said to me, I'll never forget, he said, and George, trust me, you are living every day to avoid your worst case scenario. So what is your worst case scenario? And if that's what it is that what you want it to be? And he helped me. It wasn't a quick fix. I paid a lot of money for my counselor to help me and been part of some support groups that helped me get honest with myself. So it wasn't a quick fix. This may sound like a quick story, but it wasn't a quick realization. I finally realized that the worst case scenario that I wanted to be my worst case scenario was that I would actually live a day and live my life as someone other than George. And that if my worst scenario was someone other than George, and I got up every day and decided to live as George, I was actually in charge of having the best case scenario of being George and avoiding the worst case scenario of not being George. And when I figured that out, everything changed. And it may sound strange, but I loved my wife differently when I was not trying as hard for her to like who I was. I was actually giving her the opportunity to know and love who I was. And she found it a gift, and I'm really glad of that. But it would be nice to know early on that wasn't possible. And the same came with jobs. if I couldn't keep a job as myself, it would be good to have a job that I could have as myself. And so it began a big shift for me. And one of the things that I also noticed is there in your outline is that I thought I could choose to be significant or not to be significant, or I was significant here, but I wasn't significant there. And I also came to understand that we cannot choose not to be significant. It sounds like a crude illustration. I hope it's not offensive, but if you ever walk in a public bathroom, look at the water in the toilet, it'll be moving. Because when we enter, we change the air in the room, and it causes the water to shift. You can't enter the world. You can't be in the room you're in. You can't be part of the world in any way without being significant. And if you were to just go out in the woods and lay down and die, you would fertilize the earth. You cannot be not significant. There's no way to not be significant. The question is, how will we be significant? And if we are significant as our true selves, as who we really are, we have a significance that we're in charge of, and we don't have to worry about analyzing ourselves based on the outcomes. And most of our heroes, spiritual heroes, historical heroes, were willing to be themselves and to lead in ways, no matter how it turned out. And that made the difference, is that they weren't being formed by the things outside themselves. They became solid inside themselves as themselves. And so I thought, well, if y'all wouldn't mind sharing, what do you think are some of the most common worst case scenarios in our culture? They may be yours or they may not be yours, because I found it very vulnerable when I shared my worst case scenario the first time. Now I'm glad to know it, and I'd say it easily. What do you think are some of the worst case scenarios in our culture? What people are avoiding? Yeah.
I think it would be being sheep. Just being sheep.
Being sheep.
Which nobody really can be, but it's following a religion or a direction so carefully narrow that would be the worst thing. Without having your own input and thoughts.
Right. I agree. I think that is one of them. Yep. Some people wake up in a crisis of realizing they haven't had their own life. Yep. That's exactly right.
Being poor.
Some are being poor, right?
Yeah, would be a worst case scenario. Like, that would be the worst thing in the world, is if you didn't have enough money.
Yep. That is actually one of the biggest fears, is running out of money. Yep. What are some of the others?
Poor health. Not being able
Poor
to-
health. You guys are right on. That's what the research shows. People worry about having health, and particularly having dementia. Yep. Poor health. Yep. What are some others?
Say it again, Judy.
Say it again, Judy. Say it again.
Oh, not having God in my life and, being in poor health, something like that.
Yeah.
The death of a child.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Yep. One of the other worst case scenarios is being lonely, ending up alone. And I think it's good to remember that one worst case scenario, which we can all avoid, is never being with ourselves and living as ourselves. It goes back to the idea of being sheep. But it's also the reality that if we become the author of our life story, and when I teach my seminar and stuff, I use the life story model, which has been developed by a couple of universities and based on research and everything. But the idea is to have an experience where you author your own life story, where who you are in the story and how you take characters into your story, and you decide who those characters are in your story, and you decide how you relate to the other characters in the story. And when the story enters another circumstance, you're the author of how you integrate that circumstance into the story of your life. And it's very powerful. And it fits the way our brains and our minds work, because we make narratives. Our brains and our minds make narratives that we're part of. And from the time you're in kindergarten and you begin to tell stories, you're always building the stories inside your own head that you're a part of, and you have a way of being in those stories. And so the person,
George,
yeah.
we're actually going to do this in the class with Legacy, the Legacy. So when Carol Fleischman, who's going to work with us, she's going to lead everybody and teach us how to kind of use a tool to create our stories, to capture our stories. She breaks everybody's life into 7-year periods of time. And for each 7-year period, you kind of define the story, the characters, the story, the theme, the lesson for each time.
There you go. That is right on target. Absolutely. And so that leads to the second element of the compass. Every day, get up, remember who you are, and decide that you're going to live your life as yourself each day. And then each day, remember your people, especially those core relationships. Too many people wake up distant from the people they want to be close to, and tied up and knotted up and enmeshed in lives of people they didn't really choose to be enmeshed with. And it was because they didn't intentionally invest in making the relationships happen that they wanted. And core relationships at the center is yourself, your life partner, if you have a life partner or spouse, and then your family of choice. And in today's world, a lot of people's family of choice is not made up of just people they're related to, right? My best friend is like my brother, and he and his wife are the godparents of my children. They were the godparents. We were the godparents of their children, and they are family. My boys call them aunt and uncle, but Steve and I met in 8th grade. And so knowing who your people are, and then investing in every way that you need to live to purposefully live in relationship to those people. And because we've deconstructed the old ways of building community, I wish it wasn't true, but it is true. We have to actually rebuild those connections, and in less time it takes to rebuild those relationships. And so what I do is I guide people through what I call essential conversations, which is talking to the most important people about the most important things in your life. And if we talk to the most important people about the most important things in our lives, we can then actually decide how we want to be in each other's lives. And the essential conversations process is there in your outline. First, we discover one another's life stories, listen to one another and find out where we are and where we're going in life as individuals. And then we determine how we want to be in each other's lives. Steve Crane and I, my best friend, when we were playing baseball in 8th grade, we decided we'd be best friends for life, which was like a cute thing. And he wasn't the only person I ever said that to. So, but let's be best friends for life. And it turns out we were. But we determined a long time ago to be best friends, and then have over and over again chosen to stay connected to each other's lives. So we determine how we want to be in each other's lives, and then we define the roles we play. So not only were Steve and I best friends, but we became godparents of our children. And you actually define the roles. And I have a role that I'm really working hard at. The title I go by in that role is G-Pops. That's what my 6 grandchildren call me. And I have determined that I have a role in their life as their G-Pops, their grandfather. And I work really hard to build a legacy of G-Pop. I would rather call it a legend, G-Pops. And what I'm doing is intentionally saying I want to be in my grandchildren's life in a particular way. And when they live in Scotland, you have to work differently than if they live next door. And so, but is you define the role you have in their life, then you delegate what has to be done to have that role in one another's lives. And so it can be building on a room so my dad could live with us, because I took on the role of being a caregiver for my dad. And I'm an only child, so we didn't have to have a committee meeting when I became the caregiver. And so we built on a room that was delegated. I hired somebody to build the room on so that Dad could be there. But it could also be B&G Pops. So those are the people. And I wonder if you could think of one thing that you would like to be true about your relationship with one person in your core relationships. Like if you could think of one person that's really close to you and say this, here's one thing as my life I want to be true of a relationship with that person. I want it to always be blank. Can you think of that? Anybody willing to share? Because you can share a nice funny one like G-Pops, because I have a lot more serious ones in my list. But is there one person and one way you would like to be in their life that you can think of that you'd share?
I put down my son.
Family,
Oh, go
those
ahead.
that are close,
Do
Go
what?
ahead, Fran.
like friends or families that we're close to? You mean a
Yeah.
particular way that we want to be able to relate to them?
Right.
Well, teenage grandsons are a little difficult. I'd
Right.
like to be able to relate to them better.
Right. That's right. You know, so like if you sat down and did, when you get done doing your planning and you sit down and you let your grandsons know how they fit in the plan, that might engage a kind of conversation that helps them see the significance they have to you. And oftentimes, at least I find myself doing it, I assume they would know how much I love them, assume they would know how precious they are to me, how much power they have in terms of my life. But when I would sit down with my grandson who's 11 and I would let him know he's a line item in the budget, you know, that for his birthdays and his Christmas, and seeing him, when I said, would you like me to help coach, you know, so I ended up coaching him in football and coaching him in basketball, because I could do that. My wife could teach him to sew and teach him to read well, and because she's an educator. And what could I do? I could do that. And I had to plan my life around making it possible for me to be in his life the way I wanted to be in his life. I had to really plan. I mean, and when people would say, you want to do something on Saturday, for, 8 Saturdays, there was a game. And it was just like when my boys were young and we had games on Saturday. We were back to doing it as a grandfather. And like when I wanted to be caregiver for my dad, I had to actually determine to do that. And then what does that mean? And then you do the things that it takes to be the caregiver for your dad without destroying everything that's going on in your own life. You have to actually be very deliberate about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think,
So-
George, like one of the things that you mentioned earlier today that I really loved was that that there's a distinction also when we are choosing to have a certain role, even if it is a difficult role, even if it is caregiving or, supportive or a time-consuming, emotionally difficult and draining role, that if we're choosing to do that, that's a very different situation than if we're feeling like, it's out of our power. I don't know, you could probably say that better, but.
No, that's right. The reality of human existence is that if I call it good tired and bad tired, Beth's heard me talk about it before. if you have to do something really hard and exhausting, and it costs you sleep and it costs you money, and at the end of it, you're tired. There's a very big difference between something you felt forced to do. It's a bad tired. There's resentment in the middle of it. There's all the second guessing of what you did and what you didn't do, and whether you could have done it better or worse, or the things you neglected in the middle of doing the thing that made you tired and exhausted you, or cost you a lot of money. And then there's good tired. And when my dad died, the last few days were really bad. The last couple of weeks were bad enough, but the last several days were really exhausting. And when we did his funeral, all my kids were there, my grandkids were there, cousins in from Arkansas and Texas, and I slept for 2 days. For 48 hours, I would get up, go to the restroom. A couple times I had a little snack, and I would sit down with everybody who was talking, and I would say, boy, I really like seeing all you guys. I just got to take another nap. And I'd go back to bed, and for 48 hours I slept, and it was a good tired. I felt like when my dad died, I had been to my dad who I wanted to be, and I still had date night with my wife, and I didn't bankrupt us like earlier caregiving had done. I didn't spend as much money because I knew better how to get helpers, things like that. So it was a good tired. And that's what happens if we are to our people who we want to be. Even when it gets hard, we're okay. It's okay. The third element is place, where our stories and our contributions are valued and expressed. And when people wake up sometimes at the end of life and they're in a place where they're not able to live out their life compass, what I've had people say is some version of, when I'm living here, I'm not really myself. Nobody knows who I am, person. The people around me are strangers. I don't know who they are. My people aren't here enough. And around here, they don't know what I do. They don't know my contribution. They don't know my story, and they don't treasure my story. And if you are in a place where your people are there, where you feel like you're living as yourself, and the place has those people around it who value the contribution you make, and you keep making a contribution. So when my grandma would sit around with her green bean can and her snuff, y'all old enough to remember snuff? But anyway, she had her snuff in her green bean can, and she would spin her green bean can, and she would tell stories. She was still significant. She sat and told the stories that we all wanted to remember, that were part of the stories that made us all who we were. I was walking through a retirement community in Austin, Texas, where my aunt and uncle were living, and the guy that ran it brought me by the wall where the veterans are. So they had a wall where every military veteran had a picture and a little bio of their service in the military. And he showed it to me, and I said, that is just really wonderful. That's beautiful. I said, but where's everybody else? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, my daddy went to war 3 times through Vietnam, and my mom kept us together. And I think it'd be good for her to have a place up there too, and tell how she kept going while my dad was off at war. And I bet you have some people here who were teachers and who kept people's houses cool by putting air conditioning units in. And everybody here is significant. And I think everyone here would love their story to be honored the way these people's story is honored. And he said, boy, that's a great idea. So I haven't been back to see if he expanded the wall. But if you are in a place where your story and your contribution are valued and expressed, it's there. It's part of the place. Then you can actually flourish even to the end of life. And so it's person, people, place. In the simple version, it's discovering and living into the best version of yourself as a person. It's resourcing the relationships, especially the relationships with the people closest to you. those core relationships, and always being at home, always being in a place where your story and your contribution are valued and expressed. Because place and home is not geography unless the geography puts you with your people. And then it is geography.
I think that's such a challenge too when we were talking about home, you know, last or 2 classes ago in Simplicity, is, you know, so much of the decision around housing is just focusing on the building of the house and saying like, okay, we want the house to be safe, or we'll plug you into this community and they have all these activities and, you know, whatever. And I think people instinctively know, like they say 90% of people don't want to leave their home, because I think they instinctively know that there's more to place than just, you know, the structure of that community. Like there's something that where they feel at home, and that's hard to replicate.
Right. And a beautiful thing that's happening now is that people who are choosing to stay home, by that they mean live in the same location, same house, are now realizing that they need to share their house, and being more intentional about gatherings at their house and maintaining social connections so that they don't isolate socially as they get older. But also as people move, because you know, people I'm close to now didn't even live in Raleigh 10 years ago. And they're not old. They just showed up. And some people I was close to don't live in Raleigh anymore. And so the place that we are has to do with those relationships and making sure our story and our contribution are part of it. So
how do we take all of this framework and relate it back to how does this worksheet, we talked about this earlier today, what are the limitations of this worksheet relative to your framework that you were just presenting?
Well, I think, one of the things relates back to the best case, worst case scenario, is that a lot of folks are focused on the best case and focused on how things are now and aren't thinking about how they're going to be in the future. When I was reflecting on number 4, it's number 4 on the list. I feel great about myself when I'm, and I guess one thing that's ever since I was young, when I'm playing music and singing, I feel great about myself, even if no one's around. I feel great about it when I'm just enjoying singing music and playing. And what I realized was that had to change. Where I feel great about myself now when I sacrifice to make something happen later. Where when I was younger, it had to happen now. And now I find myself making choices, sacrificing so that something can happen later that couldn't happen if I didn't start equipping the future, start resourcing the future for it to happen, happen later. And the list tends to be I, and in my understanding of the world, a lot of those questions need to be we. When do we feel good about ourselves is a great question. It's our core relationships. When do we feel good about ourselves? When we're all together, everyone's got what they need, we're reflecting on our lives, and we're all telling the stories that we're part of, and we've helped each other's lives be enriched, and we've gotten through tough times together. I lose track of time when we lose track of time when we're the change it from I to we, and it's not either or though. I'm not saying don't think about yourself. I'm saying also include what our favorite things are.
And
like
also,
Go ahead, Beth.
I was just say, so also thinking, I think when I was thinking about relationships in terms of purpose, there's kind of what I love and what makes me happy, but ultimately that can only take me so far. I would want to share that with someone, right? I'll want to, if it's making me happy, that'll get boring after a while if I'm just by myself. So I want to be thinking like, okay, if I really love, like I love writing, that's what I put down since I was 8 years old. But if I write all the time and I never share it with anyone, then it's going to kind of fester. It's going to not be enjoyed. And also there's an impact. Like if we have a skill or something that we've developed or cultivated, a passion even that, we collect trains or something. But if we want to have an impact on others and we see that light shine in a young person who sees the trains and they get excited about trains, like that impact that we've had on another human being is actually going to be where we find and connect with the meaning that we have. So I was just kind of thinking about like these questions, because George kind of challenged me a little bit on some of these questions. So I've been thinking about, so when, we think about these things kind of in terms of our society, our culture that does focus on I a lot and focuses on our individuality and, that independent spirit. And I think that what we really need in our society is to have more of the community and more connection and understand that we aren't independent beings. We are actually in this together. So how can I look at these questions about my purpose, but also keep that in mind, how I'm connecting with other people and with the world around me and whatever.
That's right. I was thinking that the question, when the one that says, if I knew I was going to die in 1 year, I would. So if you took each person in your family of choice and everybody in the family said, what if that person died in a year? What would we want to have done? What conversation would we want to have had? What would we want to have shared? So that I'm current with everybody in my core relationships. And
you mean like if we looked at our family and said, if this member of our family were to die in 1 year, what would I want to have done with that person?
What would I want to have shared with them? Like that's one of the reasons I keep taking my grandkids fishing every chance I get, is I think I would want to have taken them fishing one more time, or whatever the thing is. And I have a brother-in-law who has epilepsy and has some developmental disability, and we go out to breakfast every other week. And the reason I do that is he can't relate to me in social settings because of how he is. But if we sit together, he can relate to me. So he and I have stories that are just breakfast stories. And when I realized that if I want to be that to my brother-in-law, and my wife has one sister, I don't have any brothers and sisters, so I have one brother-in-law. So if I had 20, I wouldn't go to lunch. Probably wouldn't take them to breakfast every other week. But I want to be that to him. So what does that mean? I have to do that. And plenty of people have stories of things left unsaid, things left undone. And so most people's bucket list has to do with what they want to do. And oftentimes it involves other people. In fact, if you saw the movie Bucket List, several of them involved other people. But it is good to have an idea on how to stay current with each of the people we're closest to, that are most important to us. And we share it. So one summary statement is that our self-actualization, like Maslow talked about, and the co-actualization of one another actually go together. We actually can be ourselves better in relationship to others, and others help us to be our true selves. Just like you guys are a group, and Beth is helping you actually focus your life more in the life that you want moving forward. And you're doing it together, which I think is awesome. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is one of my heroes, and he said, if you can't be alone, no one should trust you when they're with you. No one should trust you when they're with you. And if you can't be with other people, you better not trust what you start thinking when you're all alone. And so being ourselves individually and being with others as ourselves is so important, to have both of those going on. Any thoughts or questions? This is a real quick overview of things, but I appreciate y'all letting me share because I love getting to share it.
Does anybody have any thought on like how this changed your? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Has your book come out yet?
I'm finishing it up. I'm supposed to send it to the publisher on December 16th. And
Flourishing Together is the name of it, the title?
Yeah, that's the working title right now. Life Compass Living, Flourishing Together. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah.
And George also has a podcast, right? You have a podcast?
Yeah, there's Life Compass Living podcast.
If anybody likes podcasts.
You can get it on iTunes and all that stuff. Yeah.
George can talk, so his podcasts are pretty good.
That's good.
The preacher in him.
Yeah. Yep. Well, yeah, it's really a pleasure to be with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. We enjoyed it.
Yeah, you bet.
So just to on the last couple of slides that I have on the printout here, the PowerPoint slides, I just wanted to mention, when we think about purpose, again, a lot of times we're thinking about work. We think about work, and that's how we've gone through our life a lot, is we think about our purpose, and it's relating to kind of our primary vocation. But we have choices now, and we can reflect. We can think about our purpose in very small ways as well as big ways. And there's this quote here with Mahatma Gandhi, which says, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. And so, there's been a lot of studies around volunteering and the value of volunteering, not only in the service that we're doing, but on the impact on ourselves. And it can be small ways, especially now with all the things that George was saying, how we're defining our own family units in new ways. We're also defining our communities in new ways. So we build our communities through our churches, through our neighborhoods, through our friends, through the groups that we find that we have things in common with. And volunteering is such a fun way to expand that and meet new people and find people who have different interests, and it's just so satisfying. So I put there kind of some of the benefits that volunteering can do. It can bridge the generation gap. It can give you an opportunity to work with people of different age and that you might not otherwise get to see and connect with. It can help change the way that other people think about older adults, which is very important, that we are vital and that we are contributing. It can improve our mental health and can help prevent Alzheimer's. It can prevent senior isolation and depression. And it can promote healthy physical activity. And in that very last slide there, the RSVP is the Retired Senior Volunteer Program. So that's the one in New Orleans. And they will have, it's a way for you to find opportunities to volunteer if you don't have ideas and you want some other suggestions or something new to try or whatever. So then there's the quote, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." So I would love to know, just in the last few minutes, if anyone has thoughts on their, like what purpose you have now. Like, where do you find purpose now in your life? Or where have you found purpose in your life that was surprising to you?
Awfully quiet.
Well, this is like maybe not on the subject at all, but one of my friends who's a little older than I am says, well, Mimi, you're always hanging around with younger people. And she's more like volunteering in City Park with, you know, she's probably 74, maybe. And you can find me routinely with people that are 10 or 20 years younger than I am. And I think it's because I teach music to children. And many of their parents have become friends. And for me, it helps to keep me younger, and to think more like them. And I tell people I never want to get so old that I don't know what the latest fad or cartoon is, or what the children are singing or, watching. And to me, that's helpful, because my children are grown, and even though I have grandchildren, that's living through other people. And one couple in particular, I told them that I would really like to be part of their family, and could not please take vacations with them. They have me outmatched. But those sorts of casual but caring relationships sometimes can be important, because sometimes they don't require as much hard work as your family unit does, but it can free you up to be a better person and easier to be around, I think. And that probably has nothing to do with what you asked.
No, I would agree with that. Private teaching too, that I find my students, some of my best friends, I have adult students and children, but just, we talk about all kinds of things besides music. My teachers, I was the same way with them. I mean, they were counseling, my music teachers. And so it's very unique and meaningful.
Over the weekend, I went back to Arkansas to one of my class reunions, 40 plus years. And it was very interesting to watch the crowd, because I grew up in a very small town, and so our graduating class was only 76 people. But it was so interesting, because during high school, we used the word cliques, but there were, groups of us that just basically went through elementary, middle school, high school together, and we didn't really even talk that much to the others. And we were talking about that. Several of us that got a couple nights earlier, and we were like, we don't even remember some of these people. In our class, we only had 76 people. And so we were feeling very ashamed that we could not remember some of these classmates, because we were in such our own little bubble. But I found it so interesting after the first event, which was one of the high school football games, and it was wonderful weather, so it was great, how our little clique that we hung with, we began to spread ourselves really wanted to know more about their lives and things that we had not really been very close with. And even at our final dinner on Saturday night, I looked around, it was very, very touching and very emotional, because everybody had picked a different table. And like I sat with people that I knew in high school, but I didn't really have a real close relationship with. And by the end of the night, we were exchanging phone numbers and people were, but I could see this throughout the room. So it was just great. It was like it took all the years for us to mature and begin to reconnect in a whole different way, kind of like a purpose again. And a lot of it was according to what we had done with our lives. If you were a teacher, then we kind of gravitated toward people who were educators. And a couple of people were college professors, so they kind of moved in that direction. And the people who were, salesmen kind of moved in that direction. So it was really interesting. We didn't flock ourselves to our little high school clique. So I liked that. I thought that was really interesting. It was very heartwarming to me. I came away with a really good feeling.
I just got a book, Malcolm Gladwell's new book. I don't know if anyone here knows Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, so he just came out with a new book. He wrote The Tipping Point and he wrote Blink. And he usually writes kind of lighthearted books where he pulls he asks some small question, like Blink was about how do we make our quick decisions, and are they good when we do that, or is it bad when we do that, and how do we know? But he takes that small question and looks at all different examples throughout history, and makes it very interesting. Very good storyteller. But this book, the newest one, it's called Talking with Strangers.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's a little bit, it's not as light as his other ones, so it might take me a little longer to get through it. But it's about how hard it can be for us to bridge the gap, to talk to someone who is a stranger to us, where we don't maybe have the culture or the language even or whatever, and how that's impacted our world and our history and our current world. And like this, I feel like this topic of aging and all of the things that aging is connected to is bringing us together, and that's part of the reason that I'm so interested in it, because I feel like it's bringing people together from, even in this room, even though you all know each other and you have a lot in common, you didn't necessarily know each other, or you might not know each other well, but you've come together to talk about aging. And then because of that, there's all of these topics that come up around it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it does that. It's like going to help us to see each other and find similarities where we wouldn't have otherwise found them. So at least that's my thought, my optimistic hope. And I'm really interested in this topic of purpose. And one of the things I'm going to do this month is I'm interviewing people who are willing to share their thoughts on where they found purpose in their life and where maybe it surprised them, if they changed or found a new purpose, or if it, how they felt when they didn't have a purpose in their life, and what did they do during those times. So yeah, I'm just like doing a series of interviews with people about that. George is going to be one of my people that I'm interviewing next week.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that is really difficult for me in talking about purpose and in answering these questions is that, the reality of my life and of a lot of people's lives is your purpose is determined by money. It's like, okay, you have this kind of job because that's what pays. And you live in this place because that's what you can afford. And your friends are in the same economic, situation as you. It just guides our lives so much. And And yet I know, it can be a good force, right? I mean, it can be used for good, and I know Beth had me reading a book, when was that, years ago, about, what was that book? It was something about the power of money.
Oh, the divine law of, the law of divine compensation or something?
I can't remember.
I'm trying-
But it basically was talking about how, that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative force. That, you can see that can influence your life in a positive way, that, the Lord or, power of the good can use anything and direct you. But, it's not, I would like to think that, as George says, that it's my choice and that I can choose. But when I look back at my life, that's not the way it really felt. I didn't get to choose. I had to do what I had to do to survive and try to make the most of the situation that was presented to me. And so, when I answer these questions, I'm like, yeah, I love to do this and I love to do that, but would that have been my choice if I didn't need to pay bills? And we all do.
George?
That's my contention is that, my challenge, my plea is that we would resource relationships. There's a book called The Man That Gave Up Money. He can tell you a story about how you don't have to have hardly any money. And then other people will tell you, well, we went to tiny houses and we ended up living on a lot less and sharing life a lot more. And if we were to resource our relationships, we would be focused on channeling our lives to the relationships, and that'll change everything. It doesn't ever mean you don't need money at all. It doesn't ever mean you don't want to have a job that has some capacity to connect your life to providing for yourself and others. You do those things. But I think part of what our culture has done has given us the experience of being trapped inside of a life that's not in harmony with our life compass. And we can do more of that. That's all I'm saying. To do it perfectly or to live without money, I don't want the pressure of doing it perfectly. And I can't imagine not having any money. But my own experience has been that when my budget and my connection to professional living and how much I earn is actually directed towards the relationships I actually want in my life, it's different than feeling trapped inside of something that doesn't give me the autonomy that I want and the mutuality, the shared relationships I want. And it's both. And so I want to agree with what you were saying. Totally agree with everything, maybe except the word trapped. And all I'm saying is that when we own it, when we say this is what I'm doing, like I have a friend that felt trapped in IBM. He worked for IBM for a long time and he felt trapped. And we got to know each other and we did a lot of reflecting on what I'm talking about. And he started going to work for IBM to resource the relationships he was in. He knew he could do that. And then he started deciding that, I could actually have relationships at work I haven't had before. And when he shifted the focus onto the relationships, he had the same job, but it didn't feel like the same job anymore. But that actually takes mindfulness. And I find it hard because I want to go to my defaults all the time. And so it's very challenging.
It's about nine, a little after 9:30 now. So, but I just have to say something because I find that really interesting, Kathy, that you say that, because I've always looked at you as someone who's lived a life according to your dream, because you have chosen music and you live as a musician. And I've always envied you because I felt like you were able to follow your passion. And I remember when I was working at the bank and I felt trapped because I was not feeling like I was in my place or with my people. And I was there for a long time, almost 10 years. And I would look at you, Kathy, and think, oh, you know, I wish that I had known what my passion was and that I could have lived my life and made choices to support my purpose. So
Yeah.
that's from the outside looking in.
Yeah. And to,
Is there a good book that can be read kind of in direction of that?
Well, I don't know if I mean, George, you might have some, but the ones, so I have this one, which is called Falling Upward. It's a spiritual book. It's Richard Rohr.
it's one of my favorites too.
He's a really great, really inspiring writer. He has a blog. He has a weekly email as well that you can sign up for, where he'll send you. It's called On Being, and so I can email this out. Falling Upward. And then.
Are you guys familiar with Rick Warren and The Purpose-Driven Life?
Oh
Out of
yeah.
Saddleback?
Yeah. That's a great book too.
So popular before.
Yeah. Let me write that one down. I might recommend that one. Driven Life. Yeah, so I mean, I think it is tricky, you know, when we have our back up against a wall, or when we're feeling like, you know, we don't have a lot of room to maneuver or move. We feel like we can't ask these questions, like our dreams or our wishes or our, like, you know, choices that we can make. We're like, no, you know, it's survival. And I guess I think that could be a part of life, and hopefully it's not the whole time. But I would say, I guess the invitation is, for me, is within that tightness, within those tight parameters, just try to start looking around the edges, try the periphery, just look a little bit for an opening, you know, take those little moments and start to carve them out. And in those little moments, to think about your, you know, let the dream in, let the vision in, you know, have your breathing, having your yoga. Oh, here's another book, Designing Your Life. Who's the author there? It's all in gray, hard to see.
Burnett and Evans. And then this, Your Best Year Ever, by Michael Hyatt. And the reason there are two books. Design Your Life actually has the idea of a compass in it too. Doesn't define it the same way I do, but they're both relational in the way that they approach it. So I found those very helpful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Of course, that's until my book comes out. Right.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm sorry we kept you
Thank y'all very much.
A little late tonight.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and again, congratulations. And I want to say in response to Kathy also, I think the people who dig down deep and go ahead and do what has to be done and have the experience of feeling trapped are some of the people we need to throw a party for. Just throw a party for them and say thank you. Because I'm sure my dad was trapped inside of providing for his family many times. And I'm sitting here in a nice house that he helped me have. So don't just think that's a bad thing to be faithful and do what has to be done. But I do think we were made for flourishing. And I think person, people, place helps us see how to do that. And resource and relationships is a way to see it that helps me a lot. So anyway, that's it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, George. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to have you here. Have a great night.
Glad to be here. You bet. Bye.
So also, next week, I would like to ask for all of you guys to give feedback for me to like help me know what classes of materials was working or helpful, feedback on how the presentation worked, this online thing and whatever. So just, think about it. And next week I'll try to maybe hand out a sheet of paper for you to write down some comments, or you can email them or whatever if you have thoughts too. That's fine. But this is an experiment, and your feedback is welcome. So,
Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
bye everybody. Have a great night.
You too.